The months of the year. 12 little names that we take for granted. But what do these names mean? That's what we're going to explain in this video. Some months took their names from Roman gods, powerful emperors, or the strange rituals of the ancient world. Other months, as they stand today, are lies.
You sit on a throne of lies.
History is full of almost names. Names that were proposed, almost adopted, but ultimately rejected. So let's walk through the year, month by month, and uncover the real stories behind their names, so we can be wise to the words. January. January takes its name from Janus, the Roman god of doorways and beginnings. He's usually shown with two faces, one turned towards the past and the other toward the future, which is fitting for a month that opens the year. But January wasn't always the first month. The original Roman calendar began with March, making March the start of the year. It wasn't until 153 BC that the Roman Senate moved to make January the beginning of the year, so it lined up with the elections of the new consuls. Later, Julius Caesar's reforms cemented that change. Meanwhile, in England, the Anglo-Saxons were more practical. They called January the Wolf Month, or the Wolf Month, because that was the time when starving wolves would find their way into the villages to scavenge. So while Rome thought of doorways and times and new beginnings, the Anglo-Saxons thought about survival. They were afraid of the big bad wolf. I'm cold and alone and there are wolves after me. February. February takes its name from Februar, a Roman festival of cleansing and renewal. Held in the dead of winter, it involved a sacrifice, a fire, and a very odd ritual. Young men, stripped naked, would run through the streets with strips of goat hide called Februar, whipping anyone they would meet. To us, it sounds brutal, but Roman women actually lined up for it. They wanted the abuse. They believed that this ritual promoted fertility. Februar eventually merged with Lupercalia, named after the Latin word lupus, which means wolf. It honored the cave where Rome's legendary founders, Romulus and Remus, were said to be suckled by a she-wolf. That's weird too. Centuries later, the church stepped in. Lupercalia's wild rituals were hard to reconcile with Christian values, so a feast day for Saint Valentine, a Christian martyr, was fixed on February the 14th, the day before this pagan festival. Over time, Valentine's Day absorbed Lupercalia's themes of love and fertility, but it wasn't until the Middle Ages that poets like Chaucer transformed it into a celebration of romance that we know today. February, from the little whips called Februar. Meanwhile, in England, the Anglo-Saxons had no use for these rituals. They called this month Sprout Caeleth Mona, or Sprouting Cabbage Month, because hardy greens were the first crops to push through the frozen ground. In Rome, February was all about purification and fertility. In England, again, it was about survival, basic necessity of food. March. March takes its name from the Roman god of war, Mars. In Rome's earliest calendar, March was actually the first month of the year because it marked the opening of the military campaigning season. Winter was too harsh for war, but when spring returned, then armies could march. The Anglo-Saxons call it Hulud Monath, the loud month, because of the loud, fierce winds that rattled the countryside, the windy season. Folklore added another layer, the Mad March hare, a hare being much like a rabbit, only larger and more wild, went crazy during their mating season in March. Even literature picked this up. Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland features the March hare. It's always mad. And then there's the Ides of March. In the Roman calendar, the Ides of March merely meant the middle of the month, usually the 15th, but March 15, 44 BC, became infamous, the day Julius Caesar was assassinated. What had once became a routine calendar date turned into history's most famous warning: beware of the Ides of March. And the video marches on. Excuse me, everybody, pardon me, coming through, but please do all the YouTube-y stuff. Don't wait until next month. Slap that like button and subscribe now. Maybe even ring that notification bell so you don't miss another origin story. You've got to be wise to the words. You've just got to. April. April comes from the Latin aprilis, but its origin is a little tangled. Folk etymology connected it to the Latin verb aperire, which means to open, since it's the season when buds and blossom first open. The same root gives us English words like aperture and overt, but other theories exist as to its origin. Some say April is from apru, an Etruscan name borrowed from the Greek Aphrodite, the goddess of love. Others point to Proto-Italic apero, meaning second, because in the old Roman calendar, April was the second month. So April could be the month of opening, the month of love, or simply the second one in line. We don't actually know for sure which one is true. The Anglo-Saxons called April Aster Monath, named after a local fertility goddess, Aostra. She was tied to the returning life of the spring, new life and renewal. When Christianity spread throughout England, the old festival didn't vanish. It was absorbed, was baptized, as it were. The church kept the season, but gave it a new focus, the resurrection of Christ. And while most languages kept the name linked to the Latin Pascha or Passover, English alone held on to Aostra's name for Easter. Easter comes from the Proto-Germanic root ostron, which means dawn, which in turn comes from the Proto-Indo-European root ruz, meaning to shine or the east. It's the same root that gives us the word east, since that's the direction of the sunrise. May. The name comes from Maya, a Greek earth goddess, mother of Hermes, associated with growth and fertility. The Romans also celebrated the feast of Bona Dea, the good goddess, associated with chastity and fertility, held in early May. But despite all this fertility symbolism, May held a very strange superstition. It was thought to be unlucky for weddings. Ovid, the Roman poet, even warned against it, saying marriages in May were ill-omened. That belief carried into medieval Europe, giving rise to the rhyme, "Marry in May, and you'll rue the day." Medieval poets, like Sir Thomas Malory, on the other hand, called it the lusty month of May, when nature bursts with life. So May is a paradox, fertile and full of life, but weddings were frowned upon. Now the Anglo-Saxons were less romantic. They gave May a more practical name, Three Milka Moneth, the 3-milk month, because cows could be milked 3 times a day thanks to the rich spring pastures. Got milk? May was special to the Roman. In May, the Romans also held Lemuria, a festival for restless spirits. On the nights of May 9th, 11th, and the 13th, households would try to banish ghosts from their house. The head of the family walked barefoot throughout the house at midnight, tossing black beans over his shoulder while chanting, "With these beans, I redeem me and mine." The spirits were believed to gather up these beans and leave the place, unless they spilled the beans. June. June is usually said to honor Juno, the queen of the gods and patroness of marriage and childbirth, which explains why June weddings became so popular. Others trace the name to Juvenes, Latin for youth, tying the month to youthful vigor and new beginnings. The Anglo-Saxons called it Sere Monat, the dry month, because crops ripened under the summer sun and fields began to dry out and thirst. But there's another interesting fact about Juno. She also went by the title Juno Moneta, Juno the Warner. She guarded Rome's treasury and mint. From her name Moneta, we get the English word money, as well as mint and monster.
I am the master of the mint.
So June is the money month. July. July actually began as Quintilis, Latin for 5th month. That's back when the Roman year started in March. But in 44 BC, after Julius Caesar's assassination, Mark Antony proposed to rename it Julius in his honor. Caesar had just reformed the Roman calendar, creating the Julian calendar. So naming a month after him cemented his legacy forever. The Anglo-Saxons, however, called this month Maid Moneth, the meadow month. To them, it was the season of farming. To Rome, a monument to greatness. August. August began as Sextilis, the 6th month, back again when the Roman calendar started in March. In 8 BC, it was renamed to honor Augustus Caesar, Julius Caesar's heir and Rome's first emperor. Augustus chose this month because many of his greatest triumphs happened in this month, including the conquest of Egypt after the defeat of Antony and Cleopatra. To give his month equal prestige to Julius Caesar's July, the Senate even stole a day from February, leaving poor February the shortest month. The Anglo-Saxons called it Weod Moneth, the weed month. It was called weed month because the fields exploded with growth, both useful crops, but a lot of weeds as well. And here's where the almost names matter. Before Augustus claimed Sextilis, it was just a number, plain and unglamorous. Other emperors after him tried to claim months for their own, but only Julius and Augustus succeeded. September. September comes from the Latin septem, which means 7, because again, when the Roman calendar began in March, September was the 7th month. When January began to start the year off, September became the 9th month. It was kind of a lie. The Anglo-Saxons called this month Fairfast Monat, harvest month, because this was the time to gather in the crops, especially barley, which quickly found its way into ale. October. October comes from the Latin octo, which means 8. Again, October used to be the 8th month of the year when the year started with March. Now it's the 10th month. The Anglo-Saxons called it Wien Monat, wine month. Grapes were not a staple in Northern Europe, but other fruits and grains were fermented, and October became a season of brewing and drinking before the long winter. October was also sometimes called Winterfillet, meaning winter full moon. It marked the time when the first full moon of winter signaled the season's beginning. Romans, meanwhile, saw October as a season of ending. On October 15th, they held the Equus October, or or the October horse, sacrificing a horse and even fighting over its remains. Just days later became the Armilustrium, when weapons were purified and stored away, marking the close of the military season. For Rome, October was the month of blood and war put to rest. November. November comes from the Latin novum, which means 9. It was originally the 9th month, but now the 11th. The Anglo-Saxons called it Lot Mona, blood month. This was the time when cattle were slaughtered, both for winter food and as sacrifice to the gods. Some sources also called it the Wind Mona, wind month. For the Anglo-Saxons, November was cold, bloody, and hard. And here's one of history's greatest almost names. After Julius and Augustus claimed July and August, the Senate suggested naming October after the Emperor Tiberius, but he refused, saying, "What will you do when you have 13 Caesars?" The remark was clever enough that the whole idea was scrapped. November kept its number, novum, 9th month. December. December comes from the Latin decem, which means the 10th. It's the last of the number months that no longer match its place. Anglo-Saxons called it the winter month, or sometimes holic month, which means the holy month. But December almost became something else entirely, something a little weird. Commodus, famous for his vanity and illusions of grandeur, tried to rename December Amazonias after his mistress, Amazonias. This was part of a larger scheme. He wanted to rename all the months after his own titles, and even rename Rome itself Colonia Commodiana, the colony of Commodus. But after his assassination in 192 AD, the Senate quickly erased any trace of these changes. Commodus's Amazonias month became just another forgotten almost name. So that's the story behind every month of the year, from gods to emperors to wolves to weeds. Now you're wise to the words. YouTube thinks you will like one of these videos. I agree.